Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to share an incredible story about survival, human compassion, and an unexpected discovery that changed everything. If you're already a fan of these types of stories, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps support the channel. Now let's dive into this unforgettable journey. The wind howled like something alive, a living thing trying to tear Marcus alive from the mountainside. At 68 degrees below zero, breathing itself became an act of rebellion. Each inhale scorched his lungs with crystalline fire. Each exhale froze instantly into a cloud of ice particles that caught the pale Arctic light. Marcus Henderson had lived 43 years on this earth, but never, not once, had he felt so utterly insignificant against the raw power of nature. 3 weeks ago, he'd made a decision that everyone said was insane. His wife, Sarah, had begged him not to go. His daughter, Emma, only 16 years old, had cried silently as he packed his gear. Even his best friend, Tom, who ran the outdoor supplies store, had pulled him aside and asked, "Marcus, are you sure about this?" Marcus was sure about very little in life anymore, but this expedition was different. After losing his job at the engineering firm, after the divorce proceedings began, after feeling like a failure in every conceivable way, he needed to prove something to himself. Or maybe he needed to disappear entirely. The cabin came into view through the whiteout conditions, a small, weather-beaten structure that had been abandoned for at least 2 decades. Marcus had researched it obsessively before coming here, tracking down old property records, studying maps, planning every detail with the precision he used to apply to building bridges and infrastructure. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now using his skills to isolate himself completely from civilization. He pushed through the snow-caked doorway, and the temperature inside was perhaps only marginally less hostile than the world outside, maybe 35 degrees below. His fingers were already numb, despite the expensive gloves rated for extreme cold. Marcus moved methodically, unpacking the supplies he'd brought: a high-efficiency camping stove, freeze-dried meals, water purification tablets, emergency medical supplies, and 4 notebooks, where he planned to document his thoughts during this 2-week solitary expedition. The cabin had 2 rooms. The larger one contained an old cast-iron stove, a wooden table that had warped with age, and a single narrow bed with a mattress so decomposed it looked more like a nest of deteriorated fabric. The smaller room appeared to have been used for storage, its shelves now bare except for dust, and the skeletal remains of something small, a bird or a mouse that had sought shelter years ago and never left. Marcus set about making the main room habitable. He cleared away the debris, arranged his supplies, and got the camping stove operational. The sound of gas igniting, the sight of small blue flames, the immediate warmth spreading through the enclosed space, these small victories felt monumental. He made coffee with water heated on the stove, and the ritual of it, the normalcy of such an ordinary action in such an extraordinary circumstance, brought something like peace. As darkness fell outside, Marcus sat at the wooden table with his first notebook open. The pen felt heavy in his hand. He'd planned to write detailed observations about survival techniques, weather patterns, his psychological state during extreme isolation. Instead, he wrote, "Why did I come here? Is it survival or surrender?" The question hung in the cold air between him and the flickering light of the camping stove. That first night, Marcus slept fitfully on top of his sleeping bag, too afraid to climb beneath the decomposed mattress. The wind outside never stopped. It rattled the walls, found every gap and crack, and seemed to express a kind of primal fury. He dreamed of Sarah's face the day she told him she wanted a divorce, of Emma's silence at his last birthday dinner, of the moment his boss had told him the firm was restructuring and his position was being eliminated. Morning came grey and indistinguishable from night. The temperature had dropped further. Marcus checked his external thermometer, now touching -72. He forced himself to eat, to drink water, to move through the routines that kept a human body functioning. He was checking the cabin's structural integrity, ensuring the walls were as sealed as possible, when he noticed something odd about the storage room's far corner. The floorboards there seemed slightly raised, as if something had been placed underneath them long ago and had warped the wood. Marcus approached carefully, testing each board before putting his full weight on it. The third board gave slightly under pressure, and when he examined it more closely, he realized it had been deliberately cut and fitted back into place. His heart rate increased. He wasn't sure why. This was just an old cabin, and whatever might be hidden here was certainly of no value or importance. And yet, something drove him to work the board loose, to pry it up with a piece of metal he'd brought from his toolkit. Beneath the floorboard was a small wooden box, sealed with a simple latch. Marcus sat back on his heels, staring at it. He thought about the Pandora's box concept, how opening something can release consequences you cannot anticipate. He thought about whether some secrets should remain buried. He thought about the fact that he was alone in a cabin at the edge of human endurance, and whatever was in this box had been sealed beneath the floor for probably decades. Then he opened it, mid-video engagement. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me continue creating content like this for you. The box contained photographs, not many, perhaps a dozen, but each one told a fragment of a story that Marcus couldn't quite piece together. The images were old, the colors faded to sepia tones and muted blues. They showed a woman, young and beautiful, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to look directly at whoever held the camera. In some photos, she was alone. In others, she stood beside a man with kind features and a serious expression. In one particularly striking image, she held a baby, her face radiant with joy. There were also documents: a marriage certificate dated 1952, a birth certificate for a child, a boy, born in 1953, and letters, dozens of them, written in a neat, careful hand that must have belonged to the woman in the photographs. Marcus pulled on his gloves and took the first letter carefully from the envelope. The date was May 1963. "My dearest James," it began, "I cannot stay here any longer. You know how I feel about your choice, and I know you cannot understand my position. But I must leave. I must take our son and find a different life, a life where he can grow without the shadow of what his father has become. I pray every day that you will reconsider. I pray that you will choose a different path. If you do, you know where to find us. You will always be loved, but I cannot watch you destroy yourself any longer. Yours forever, Margaret." Marcus read through the letters chronologically. They painted a portrait of a relationship fracturing under the weight of unnamed pressures. James had apparently become involved with something. Margaret never explicitly stated what, but the implications were dark. There were references to the company's true nature, the things I've learned, and the people who would silence us both. One letter from 1965 was short and devastating. "James, our son asked today why you never came. He is old enough to understand part of the truth now. I told him that you loved us, but that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome a person's choices. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry that it had to be this way." The final letter, dated 1967, was different in tone. It was hopeful. "James, I've heard through Margaret's brother that you're well, that you found work in another state, that you built a different life. I'm relieved beyond words. Our son is doing well in school. He's intelligent and kind, and I can see so much of you in him, the good parts of you, the parts I always knew were there. Perhaps one day, when he's older, I'll tell him the full story. Perhaps he'll understand that sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do is walk away from something that destroys them. I wish you peace, James. I truly do." Marcus sat in the frozen cabin, holding letters that had been written nearly 60 years ago, and felt something shift inside his chest. He wasn't sure what he was experiencing: empathy, recognition, something deeper. This man, James, whoever he had been, had faced a choice between the person he was becoming and the life he wanted to have, and apparently, he had chosen differently. The box contained one final item, a photograph, newer than the others, slipped into a sealed envelope addressed to "Whoever finds this." Marcus opened it to find a note written in shaky handwriting, more recent perhaps from the 1980s or 1990s. "If you've found this, then I'm gone. I came to this cabin in 1962 to hide from the life I was living. I came here to decide whether to end it all. My wife Margaret didn't know I was here, but I knew she'd left me. I spent 2 weeks in this cabin in winter, alone with my choices and my regrets. In the end, I chose to live, not for myself, but because I believed I didn't have the right to cause my family more pain. I rebuilt everything. I became a different man. The photograph here is me, 50 years later, with my son, with Margaret, with the grandchildren they never thought I'd meet. I'm leaving this record here because someone might someday need to know that it's never too late to change. That isolation isn't the answer. That the person you've been isn't who you have to be forever. Live well, choose courage over despair, and if you can, reach out to someone. Don't stay alone with your darkness. The photograph showed a man in his 80s, surrounded by family. The boy from the 1953 birth certificate, now a middle-aged man, Margaret appearing as a grandmother figure, and children and grandchildren whose existence represented decades of recovered life and healed relationships. Marcus held the photograph in his shaking hands and began to cry. The next morning, or what passed for morning in the unending twilight of the deep winter, Marcus didn't leave the cabin. He sat with the letters and photographs spread across the wooden table, reading through them again and again. He found himself constructing the narrative. James, working for some organization. Marcus suspected defense contractors or intelligence agencies, based on the veiled language, had perhaps discovered unethical or illegal activities. Margaret had wanted him to leave, to prioritize their family. James, caught between loyalty to his employer and love for his family, had initially refused. This had driven Margaret away, but the final note suggested that James had eventually come to this very cabin, had faced his darkness alone in the cold, and had emerged with a different choice. He'd found a way to leave his old life behind, to rebuild, to reconnect with his family. The letter addressed to whoever finds this transformed in meaning for Marcus with each reading. Was it a message intended only for a stranger? Or had James perhaps left it, hoping that someone, anyone, who read it might understand that redemption was possible? Marcus thought about his own life. The engineering firm where he'd worked for 15 years, where he'd watched himself gradually compromise his integrity, accepting projects he knew were ethically questionable because the paychecks were good. The marriage to Sarah, which had begun with genuine love but had withered under the weight of his absence, not just physical absence but emotional withdrawal, the slow erosion of intimacy as he became more focused on climbing the professional ladder. He thought about Emma, his daughter, whose graduation he'd nearly missed because of a business meeting. He thought about the hollow feeling in his chest that had become so familiar he'd stopped noticing it. He thought about driving up to this cabin, telling himself it was a spiritual journey or a survival challenge, when the truth was simpler and more terrible. He'd come here to disappear. The camping stove heated water for another cup of coffee, and Marcus looked out the small window toward the vast white landscape beyond. The temperature was dropping again. The thermometer now read -75 degrees. The weather forecast he'd checked before leaving civilization had predicted a severe storm system moving through the region within 72 hours. He should leave soon. He should pack his gear and make the difficult journey back to civilization while it was still possible. But something was stopping him. On the afternoon of his 4th day at the cabin, Marcus made a decision. He found paper in his backpack and began writing a letter to Emma. He didn't know if he would actually send it, but the act of writing felt essential somehow. "Dear Emma," he wrote, "I'm sitting in an old, freezing cabin in the mountains, and I'm writing to you because I need you to understand something. I've been a poor father to you. I've been absent, preoccupied, and worse than that, I've modeled for you a life of compromise and emptiness. I came to this place thinking I was running towards something, adventure, clarity, truth. But I think I was actually running away, running from you, from your mother, from myself." He paused, the pen trembling in his hand. "I found something here, not what I expected to find. I found the story of a man named James who faced a similar crossroads. He had to choose between the person he was becoming and the person he wanted to be. He chose to change. That choice cost him everything and gained him everything. A real relationship with his son, his grandchildren, a life that meant something." Marcus continued writing for hours, pouring out thoughts he hadn't allowed himself to articulate in years. He wrote about his failures, his fears, his genuine desire to be different. He wrote about how much he loved Emma, even when he was too damaged and distracted to show it properly. He wrote about wanting to try again, to rebuild, to become someone worth knowing. When he finished, the letter was 12 pages long. He folded it carefully and placed it in his backpack. He didn't know yet if he would send it, but the act of writing it had shifted something internal, some fundamental arrangement of his emotional geography. That night, the wind outside intensified. Marcus could hear it screaming around the cabin's corners, could feel the structure shifting minutely as the gusts tested its integrity. He added more wood to the fire and prepared his supplies, making sure everything was secure. The promised storm was arriving earlier than expected. He sat at the table, reading James's final letter one more time. "Live well. Choose courage over despair. And if you can, reach out to someone. Don't stay alone with your darkness. Marcus pulled out his phone. He'd left it on, knowing that service this deep in the mountains was sporadic at best. But there was a text message sent 18 hours ago when he'd briefly picked up signal at the cabin's highest point. "Dad, I don't know if you'll get this, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. Mom said you're on some survival trip, and I guess you needed that. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for being distant lately. I miss my dad. Love, Emma." The message was dated 2 days before he'd arrived at the cabin, sent into the digital void without any expectation of a response. Reading it now, Marcus felt something crystallize inside him. This was the moment. This was the choice that James had made, and he was being offered the same. He began composing a reply. "Emma, I'm here. I'm alive, and I'm thinking about you too. I want to tell you something when I get back. Something important. I love you. Always have. Always will. Dad." He pushed send and waited. The message showed as undelivered, caught somewhere between the mountains and the network, but eventually it would go through. Eventually, Emma would read it. For the first time since arriving at the cabin, Marcus allowed himself to hope. Second mid-video engagement. If this story is resonating with you, please leave a comment below. I'd love to know what you think about Marcus and his journey. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the perfect time to join our community. The weather deteriorated rapidly through the evening. By nightfall, the wind had reached speeds that made the cabin's walls groan under the pressure. Snow was being driven horizontally, and the visibility outside had reduced to almost nothing. Marcus secured everything that could move, double-checked the stove's ventilation to ensure he wouldn't accumulate dangerous carbon monoxide, and prepared to wait out the storm. The cabin's structural integrity seemed solid, but as the hours progressed, Marcus became increasingly aware of how isolated he truly was. The nearest ranger station was 15 miles away. The nearest town was 40 miles away. He had emergency supplies, communication equipment, and survival knowledge. But if something went seriously wrong, a fire, a structural failure, a medical emergency, help would not arrive in time. Around midnight, the temperature outside had dropped to -79 degrees. Marcus was running the camping stove more frequently, burning through his fuel supply faster than he'd anticipated. He did the calculations and realized he might have miscalculated. If the storm lasted longer than a few more days, he could run out of fuel before conditions improved enough to leave safely. He tried not to panic. Panic served no purpose in survival situations. Instead, he methodically assessed his options. He could ration the stove fuel more carefully, allowing the temperature inside to drop to uncomfortable but survivable levels. He could break up the old wooden furniture for fuel, the table, the bed frame, the shelving. The wood was old and might be damp, but in a direct fire, it would burn. As Marcus was considering this option, he noticed something he'd overlooked before. In the back of the storage room, partially hidden behind where the box had been hidden, was what appeared to be a small trapdoor in the floor. Marcus examined it carefully and found it covered with a layer of dust so thick it had formed a kind of crust. He pried it open gently and discovered a root cellar beneath the cabin, a space dug into the earth and lined with stone, the kind that had been common in older structures for food storage. The cellar was remarkably well preserved, sealed against the extreme cold of the mountain winters. And inside, Marcus found something astonishing: canned goods. Dozens of them stacked neatly on wooden shelves. Some of the labels were from the 1980s and 1990s. Apparently, James had stocked this cabin with supplies for some kind of extended stay or emergency. Marcus brought several cans up to examine them. Beans, vegetables, soup, fruit. The cans were all well sealed, no visible rust or damage. They were probably still safe to eat, though he couldn't be certain. But more importantly, he found something else: a large ceramic jug sealed with wax. Inside was lamp oil, rendered animal fat that could be used for fuel and light. James had prepared this space. James had left supplies for whoever might come after him, whoever might find themselves in this situation. Marcus found an old camping lamp and some wicks in the storage area, and managed to get the lamp functioning. The oil burned with a steady flame, providing warmth and light. As the lamp burned, Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of why James had left his note. It wasn't just about redemption and second chances. James had deliberately prepared this space as an act of future kindness, not knowing who would use it or when, but believing that someone someday might need what he was leaving behind. That act of anonymous compassion, of providing for a stranger you might never meet, struck Marcus as profoundly generous. It suggested that James's redemption had been complete, that he'd reached a place where he could think of others' needs rather than his own pain. Over the next 3 days, as the storm raged outside, Marcus used James's supplies to maintain his warmth and sustenance. He began a new journal entry documenting what he'd found and his thoughts about the moral implications of what he'd discovered. "I came to this mountain to disappear," he wrote, "but I keep finding reasons to live. A woman's letters to a man she loved, a final note addressed to a stranger. Supplies left behind by someone who believed that kindness could transcend time and reach people you'd never meet. These small acts of love and consideration keep reaching across decades to touch me here, now, in this moment when I was most vulnerable to despair." He continued, "I think I understand now why I'm still alive. It's not about me proving something to myself or to anyone else. It's about the fact that Emma sent me a text message that reached through the digital void and found me just when I needed it most. It's about Sarah, who, despite our failed marriage, cared enough to worry about where I'd gone. It's about the fact that there are people in my life who would grieve if I died, just as James's family grieved his absence for years. That's not weakness. That's connection. That's what makes life worth living." On the morning of the 4th day, the wind began to diminish. The temperature remained brutally cold, but the storm was breaking. By afternoon, Marcus could see the mountains rising beyond the cabin, their peaks still shrouded in cloud, but solid and real. The weather forecast, which he could finally access again as his phone picked up sporadic signal, indicated that the system would clear by the following morning. He had a decision to make. He could leave immediately, pack his gear and begin the descent while daylight lasted, or he could wait until morning and leave with the full day ahead of him. Marcus realized he wanted to spend one final night in the cabin. He wanted to properly pack away James's letters and photographs, returning them to the box and placing the box back where it had been hidden, not out of any desire to conceal them, but as a way of preserving them, leaving them for perhaps another person who might someday need to know that change is possible. He spent the evening preparing, organizing his gear, writing one final entry in his journal. "Tomorrow I descend, not in escape, but in return. I'm returning to my life, to my daughter, to the possibility of rebuilding what I've damaged. I'm returning as a different person than the one who came here, not because I survived extreme cold and isolation, but because I found evidence that redemption is real. That change is possible, that the people we love are always worth fighting for, even when we've failed them. Thank you, James. Whoever you were, wherever you are now, thank you for leaving breadcrumbs of hope." The morning broke clear and cold, but no longer violently so. The temperature had risen to a mere negative 58 degrees, which felt almost temperate after the depths of the previous days. Marcus packed methodically, ensuring he didn't leave anything behind except the box, which he returned to its hiding place beneath the floorboards of the storage room. He left the cabin at first light, and the descent was more treacherous than the ascent had been. The snow that had accumulated during the storm was substantial, and though it had begun to settle and consolidate, it created unstable footing in places. Marcus moved carefully, testing each step, aware that a twisted ankle or a fall could be catastrophic, given his distance from help. By midday, he'd descended enough to pick up cell signal. His phone immediately flooded with notifications. Messages from Sarah. "Where are you? Please tell me you're safe." Messages from Emma. "Dad, I've been so worried. Please respond." A voicemail from Tom at the supply store. "Marcus, call me as soon as you get this. I'm organizing a search team if we don't hear from you by tomorrow." Marcus stopped on the mountainside and made a phone call. Tom answered on the first ring. "Marcus, thank God. Are you safe?" "I'm safe," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the mountain air. "I'm coming down now. I'll be at the trailhead by late afternoon." "What the hell happened? We thought you were missing. Sarah's been beside herself." "Tom, I'm okay. I need you to do me a favor. When I get down, I need you to tell Sarah and Emma that I want to meet with them, both of them. I have something important to say." There was a pause, then, "Okay, yeah, I'll tell them. Marcus, are you sure you're all right?" "I'm better than I've been in years," Marcus said, and he meant it. The rest of the descent took 6 hours. By late afternoon, as the sun began its rapid descent toward the western mountains, Marcus emerged from the wilderness onto the paved parking area where he'd left his truck. A ranger was waiting. Tom had indeed called for a welfare check. But seeing Marcus appear under his own power, the ranger simply nodded and made a quick phone call reporting that the missing hiker had self-exited. Tom arrived at the parking area within 20 minutes, driving too fast in his eagerness to reach his friend. Marcus was changing into dry clothes in the truck bed when Tom pulled up and practically ran toward him. "Jesus, Marcus," Tom said, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Don't you ever do that again without better communication. Sarah's been a wreck. Emma too." "I know," Marcus said, "and I'm going to make amends for that. But I need to talk to them first." They drove to the small coffee shop where Marcus and Sarah had met for their divorce mediation. Sarah was already there, her face showing the strain of worry and anger and something else, something that looked like hope, though Marcus wasn't sure he was reading it correctly. Emma was with her. Marcus felt tears rise immediately seeing his daughter. She looked so much older than she had when he'd left, though only 2 weeks had passed. The worry lines around her eyes, the tightness in her jaw, these were things he'd caused. "Dad," she said, and moved toward him. "Emma, I'm sorry," Marcus began, but she wrapped her arms around him and held him close, and he understood that the apology was just the beginning of a longer process. They sat at a corner table in the coffee shop, the three of them, and Marcus began to tell the story of what he'd found in the cabin. He told them about James and Margaret and the letters spanning decades. He told them about James's journey from darkness to redemption, about his decision to live for his family rather than for himself. He told them about the supplies left behind, the lamp oil and canned food, the act of anonymous kindness that had sustained him through the storm. "I went to that mountain running away," Marcus said. "I was running away from my failures, from disappointment, from the belief that I'd become someone irredeemable. But I found something there, not redemption exactly, but evidence that redemption is possible, that change is possible, that the people we love deserve more from us than our silence and absence." Sarah was crying quietly, her hands folded on the table. Emma was listening intently, her young face serious, with an understanding that seemed beyond her years. "I want to ask your forgiveness," Marcus continued, "not as an apology that resolves everything, but as a commitment to be different, to be present, to be someone you can rely on, someone you can trust with your vulnerability. I can't undo the past. I can't unmiss Emma's soccer games or unabandon you through the worst years of our marriage, Sarah. But I can change moving forward. I'm asking for a chance to prove that." Sarah and Emma exchanged looks, not the guarded looks of people deciding whether to trust someone, but something warmer, something that suggested they'd already decided, and they were just verifying that Marcus had arrived at the same conclusion. "We'll try," Sarah said simply. "No promises that everything will be perfect, but we'll try." "We'll try," Emma echoed, and Marcus, sitting in a small coffee shop on the edge of a mountain town, felt something shift inside him. It wasn't the dramatic transformation of a story's climax. It was something quieter, something deeper, the slow realignment of his priorities from destruction to creation, from isolation to connection. Vou expandir os capítulos 6 e 7 com mais detalhes, descrições e profundidade emocional, mantendo a qualidade narrativa. 6 months later, Marcus had rebuilt his life in ways both large and small, though the process had been far more challenging and rewarding than he'd initially anticipated. The first weeks after descending from the mountain had been the hardest, not because of physical recovery, but because of the emotional and psychological work required to genuinely transform from the inside out. He'd found new work at a consulting firm that specialized in ethical infrastructure projects. The firm was smaller than his previous employer, with a team of only 12 people working out of a modest office in the downtown area. The pay was considerably less, nearly 40% lower than what he'd earned at his previous position, but the work meant something. The projects they undertook were designed to improve communities, to build infrastructure that would serve people for decades. Marcus found himself engaged in the work in a way he hadn't been in years. He attended meetings with genuine interest rather than going through the motions. He mentored younger engineers. He brought ideas to the table without fear of losing position or status. His apartment was small, a one-bedroom in a building that had seen better decades, but was clean and affordable. The walls were sparse, decorated only with a few photographs, one of Emma at her high school graduation ceremony, one of James's family that Margaret had sent him, one of Marcus himself as a child with his own father, a man he'd always meant to reconcile with, but had let time slip away. The apartment wasn't designed to impress anyone. It was designed to be a place where he could live honestly, without the facade of success that had characterized his previous home. The structured time with Emma had become the highlight of his weeks. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Marcus picked her up from school, and they did something together, sometimes as simple as getting coffee and sitting in a park, sometimes more elaborate, like going to museums or taking short hiking trips in the lower elevations, where the trails were more accessible. These weren't the obligatory, distracted interactions of his previous parenting. Marcus put his phone away. He asked Emma genuine questions and listened to her answers without planning what he would say next. He told her about his own struggles and fears, modeling the vulnerability he was learning to practice. Emma, for her part, seemed to blossom in ways that broke Marcus's heart, with how obvious it was that she'd been starving for his attention. She brought him her school projects, a presentation on climate change that she was working on for her environmental science class, a short story she'd written for her English class that was genuinely moving in its emotional complexity. She introduced him to her best friend, Kai, a non-binary teenager with blue hair and a sharp wit, and Marcus realized with some shame that he'd somehow missed meeting Kai in all the years before, that his daughter had an entire life that had been developing without his presence as any kind of anchor. One Thursday evening, as they sat in a bookstore cafe drinking tea, Emma said something that crystallized for Marcus how far he'd come. "Dad, I'm glad you're okay now. I was really scared for a while. After you came back from the mountain, I was afraid you'd leave again, or that you'd go back to how you were. But you haven't. You've stayed." Marcus felt tears begin to form and didn't hide them. "I'm going to stay," he said. "I'm going to keep showing up, even when it's difficult, even when I'm tired or stressed or having a bad day. You're my daughter, and being your father is one of the most important things I'll ever do." "I was so lost for so long that I forgot that." Emma reached across the small table and took his hand. "I know you're trying," she said, "and I appreciate it." Sarah and Marcus never reconciled romantically. Both of them had acknowledged that the marriage had ended for real and fundamental reasons that mere effort couldn't overcome. But something unexpected and beautiful happened in the space after the divorce became final. Without the pressure of being married, without the weight of accumulated resentment and disappointment, they could appreciate what had originally drawn them together: similar senses of humor, compatible interests in books and film, a deep respect for each other's resilience and capacity for growth. They began meeting for coffee once a week, initially to discuss Emma's schedule and needs, but gradually the conversations broadened. Sarah told Marcus about the therapy she'd started, about how she was rebuilding her own life and identity outside of being a wife or mother. Marcus shared his own therapeutic journey, the work he was doing to understand the roots of his avoidance and his tendency toward isolation. They laughed together about the absurdity of certain situations, supported each other through difficulties, and developed something that neither had expected: a genuine friendship. Emma benefited tremendously from seeing her parents cooperate peacefully, from witnessing that it was possible to end a romantic relationship with grace and continue caring about each other's well-being. She began to speak more openly with both of them, trusting that neither would use the information against the other or require her to take sides. She was 17 years old when she told her parents that she'd been struggling with anxiety and depression, that she wanted to start therapy herself. Both Marcus and Sarah responded with support rather than shame, and Marcus made sure to attend parent-teacher conferences and to check in regularly with Emma about her mental health. But perhaps the most profound change in Marcus's life came from an unexpected direction. About 4 months after his descent from the mountain, Marcus made a decision that had been forming in his mind like a crystal gradually taking shape. He sat down at his computer late one evening, a time when he'd normally been scrolling mindlessly through news or social media, and began researching. Using the names and dates and details from the letters and photographs he'd found in the cabin, he started the painstaking process of trying to track down James's descendants. He began with genealogy websites, cross-referencing names and dates, building family trees based on birth and marriage certificates. He found James's son listed in a high school alumni database from the 1970s. He found marriage announcements. He found obituaries. Slowly, the digital trail led him to a contemporary person, James's grandson, whose name appeared on a school district website as a middle school history teacher. It took weeks of careful research and verification, making sure he had the right person before reaching out. Marcus wrote and rewrote the email dozens of times, uncertain how his message would be received. How do you tell someone that their ancestors' actions 60 years ago changed your life? How do you explain that a note left in an abandoned cabin, written for no one in particular, had become a lifeline at your moment of greatest darkness? Finally, on a Thursday evening, after spending several hours with Emma and feeling grounded in the reality of his transformed life, Marcus composed a final version and sent it. Dear name of James's grandson, my name is Marcus Henderson, and I'm reaching out because of something your grandfather left behind, something that changed the trajectory of my life in ways I'm still processing and understanding. Last winter, I found myself alone in an old cabin high in the mountains, in a state of profound crisis. I had come to that place running from my life, from my failures, from the belief that I'd become someone irredeemable. Your grandfather, James, had left supplies in that cabin, canned food, lamp oil, materials for survival. More importantly, he left a note addressed to whoever finds this, a letter about his own experience in that cabin decades earlier, about his journey from darkness toward redemption, about his decision to live for his family rather than for himself. I want to be direct. That note saved my life, not just physically, though the supplies certainly helped me survive the storm that came through while I was there, but emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. That note reached across nearly 60 years and told me that change is possible, that redemption is real, that the person you've been is not who you must remain forever. I've since contacted a local historian and property owner to learn more about your grandfather's history. I understand he experienced some kind of crisis or turning point in his life, that he chose to rebuild and reconnect with his family, that he went on to live a long and meaningful life. I wanted your family to know that his choice to leave that note, his act of faith that someone someday might need it, saved me. It brought me back to my daughter, helped me rebuild my relationship with my ex-wife, gave me the courage to make genuine changes in my life. I'm not a stranger looking for anything from your family. I'm simply someone who wants to express profound gratitude. If your family would be willing to hear more of my story or to share more about James's journey, I would be honored. But if you'd prefer to keep this private, I understand and respect that completely. He hit send before he could overthink it further, and then he waited. The response came within 2 hours, faster than he'd expected. This is Margaret, James's great-granddaughter. You just made my mother cry. She's been trying to get everyone in the family to appreciate Grandpa James's story and his journey toward redemption. He wrote quite a bit about it in his later years, and the family has it documented in journals and letters. To know that he helped a stranger, that his words are still reaching people decades after he wrote them, that his decision to leave those supplies and that note had such a profound impact. This is exactly what he would have wanted. Please tell us more. Tell us everything. What followed was an exchange of emails that evolved into phone calls and eventually an invitation for Marcus to come to Margaret's family home for dinner. The invitation included an implicit welcome to bring Emma if he wanted to. He asked his daughter if she'd be interested in meeting people whose ancestor had fundamentally changed her father's life. Definitely, Emma said without hesitation. That's insane that you found them. That's like something from a movie. The dinner happened on a Saturday evening in late spring, nearly 8 months after Marcus's descent from the mountain. He and Emma drove to Margaret's home, a modest but warm house in the suburbs with a well-maintained garden and comfortable furnishings. Margaret answered the door, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and an immediate welcoming manner. She embraced Marcus like she'd known him for years, and then she knelt slightly to be at eye level with Emma. "You must be Emma," she said. "Your dad's told us so much about you." "He's told me about your great-grandfather," Emma replied. "It's kind of amazing that he left something that helped my dad so much." The evening became something approaching a celebration. Margaret's family, her mother Patricia, James's granddaughter, Patricia's husband David, Margaret's younger brother James, named after his great-grandfather, and James's partner Michael, welcomed Marcus and Emma with a warmth that suggested they'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. Patricia, in particular, seemed deeply moved. She was a woman in her late 60s, with grey hair and an expression of profound kindness. "My father, James, didn't talk much about his early life," she explained as they all sat around the dining room table. "He was a changed man by the time I was born, but in his journals, which he left for us after he died, he wrote about his time in that cabin, about standing at the edge of an abyss and choosing to step back. about realizing that ending his life would be the ultimate act of cruelty to the people who loved him, and that the only real act of courage was to rebuild, to reconnect, to become someone worth knowing. She pulled out a leather-bound journal, weathered and well-loved. He writes about leaving supplies in the cabin, about the belief that someday someone might need them. He even writes about you, Marcus, not by name, but he writes, "I'm leaving this record not just for myself, to remember what I've overcome, but for whoever finds it. Whoever you are, wherever you are in your journey, know that it's not too late. Know that the darkness is not permanent. Know that the people who love you deserve to have you stay." Marcus felt tears flowing freely, and he didn't try to hide them. Emma put her hand on his shoulder, and Patricia reached across the table to squeeze his other hand. The conversation ranged widely throughout the evening. Marcus told the family about his own journey, the engineering firm, the marriage, the feeling of emptiness that had driven him toward the mountain. He told them about finding the letters and photographs, about James's transformation visible in the progression of his handwriting across decades. He told them about Emma, about his commitment to being present in her life in a way he'd failed to do before. Patricia shared more about her father. He'd become a high school teacher like his father before him had become. He'd married twice, first to a woman named Catherine, with whom he had 2 children, then after Catherine's death to a woman named Eleanor, who had been his companion through the final 30 years of his life. He'd been involved in his community, had volunteered with youth organizations, had spent his final decades trying to give back in whatever ways he could. He always said that redemption isn't about erasing your past, Patricia explained. It's about acknowledging what you've done, understanding why you did it, making amends where possible, and then living in a way that honors the people who gave you a second chance. He lived that philosophy every day. Margaret brought out a photo album, and the group spent an hour looking through images of James across the decades, as a young man with an expression of trouble or determination in his eyes, as a middle-aged father surrounded by grandchildren, as an elderly man with a peaceful expression sitting in a garden with Eleanor at his side. The progression was visible not just in the graying of his hair, but in the softening of his features, the increase of joy in his expressions as the years accumulated. He died at 91, Margaret said. He was still mentally sharp, still reading, still thinking about the world. The last thing he did was write a letter, not about himself, but about his hopes for the next generation. He wanted to make sure we understood that the capacity to change isn't limited to special people. It's available to anyone willing to do the hard work. When Marcus and Emma left that evening, they were carrying photocopies of some of James's journal entries, passages about redemption, about the importance of connection, about the long work of rebuilding a life. Patricia had also given Marcus a small book, a collection of essays James had written in his later years for a local newspaper. One essay was titled, "The Second Chance I Almost Refused," and it was a powerful meditation on the moment in the cabin, on the decision to live, and on all the years of good that had flowed from that single choice. As Marcus drove Emma home, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That could have been you. If you hadn't found that note, if you hadn't come back down the mountain." "I know," Marcus said, "but I did. I found the note and I came back, and I've been trying every day since to live in a way that honors that second chance." "I'm glad," Emma said simply. "I'm really glad you're my dad." Marcus pulled over for a moment, unable to drive through the tears that suddenly overwhelmed him. He and Emma sat together in the parked car, and he held his daughter close, grateful beyond words for the grace that had allowed him to be here, to be present, to be alive in a way that mattered. 1 year after his winter in the cabin, Marcus stood at the trailhead again at sunrise, but this time he was not alone. Emma was with him, now a senior in high school with college acceptances already arriving in the mail, offers from schools with excellent environmental science programs. Sarah had come as well, wanting to witness the place that had been so pivotal in the transformation of the man who had been her husband and remained an important part of her life. The 3 of them stood in the early morning light, the mountain rising before them in shades of gray and white and blue. The weather was clear and cold, but nothing like the lethal temperatures of Marcus's solitary winter. The cold here was crisp and invigorating rather than annihilating, a cold that spoke of clarity rather than danger. Emma stood close to her father, their shoulders nearly touching. Sarah stood a few feet away, maintaining the respectful distance of someone who was present but not intrusive. someone who had learned to be part of a family in a different configuration than before. It was an awkward arrangement that nevertheless felt right. Not the nuclear family of tradition, but something more honest, more real, more reflective of how actual human relationships often develop and change and evolve. I'm going to apply for a summer research position with the State Environmental Monitoring Program, Emma said, breaking the morning silence. They work extensively in this region, and I thought it would be good experience for my college applications and for understanding the work I want to do. I'm particularly interested in how climate change is affecting alpine ecosystems, and they have data going back decades in some of these areas. That sounds perfect, Marcus said. That sounds like exactly the kind of meaningful work you should be doing, and I want to help you. I'd like to come up here with you when you're doing your research, help you set up your instruments or whatever you need, be part of this work in some way. You don't have to, Emma began, but Marcus interrupted her gently. I want to, he said firmly. I want to be part of your journey toward your future, not just supporting you from a distance, but actively engaged in what you're building. That's what being a parent means, not just providing resources, but showing up, being interested, being present. For years I was doing the resources part, while failing at the presence part. I want to get both, right now. Sarah smiled, and there was something in that smile, an acceptance, a recognition of how far they'd all come from the darkness of 2 years prior. The marriage had ended, but the family had transformed into something stronger, something more authentic. They walked up the trail for about an hour, far enough to see the cabin in the distance, a small structure barely visible against the vast landscape. It looked tiny and fragile from this vantage point, as though a strong wind might blow it away. Yet it had sheltered Marcus through the worst storm, had protected him through the nights when the temperature dropped to its most lethal, had held the artifacts of redemption that had changed his life. At a high point on the trail, Marcus stopped and turned to face Emma and Sarah. I want to tell you both something, he said. Not as a performance or as some kind of milestone moment, but just as a truth that I need to express. 2 years ago, I came to this mountain believing I wanted to disappear. I came here thinking that my absence would be better for everyone, that I was a failure at being a husband and a father and a person. What I found instead was evidence that change is possible, that redemption is real, and that the people we love are always worth fighting for, even when we've failed them. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I found a note left by a man named James who'd faced his own darkness in that cabin 60 years ago. He chose to live. He chose to rebuild. He chose to reach toward his family with humility and commitment. His choice to live rippled forward through his entire family tree, his children, his grandchildren, great-grandchildren who exist because he decided to stay. And his choice to leave a note, written for no one in particular, reached me at exactly the moment I needed it most. Emma was crying now, tears streaming down her face in the cold mountain air. Sarah had her arm around their daughter's shoulders. I want you to know, Marcus continued, that every day I choose to stay. Every day I choose to show up. Every day I choose connection over isolation, presence over absence, truth over the facade I was maintaining. That choice isn't always easy. There are still days when I feel the pull toward my old patterns, when I want to withdraw or avoid. But I think of James, I think of the note he left, I think of how his decision to live created decades of joy and meaning, and I choose differently. He took Emma's hand, then reached out to take Sarah's as well, the three of them connected on the mountainside where everything had changed. I'm grateful, Marcus said simply. Grateful for the mountain, grateful for the cabin, grateful for James and his courage. Grateful for both of you, for giving me a second chance, for believing that I could change. Grateful for the privilege of still being here. And later, at dinner in the mountain town, at a restaurant that had become familiar during Marcus's visits to coordinate with the property owner about preserving the cabin, the conversation turned toward the future with a sense of genuine hope rather than the desperate grasping for meaning that had characterized Marcus's previous attempts at optimism. Emma talked about her college plans with enthusiasm. She'd been accepted to 3 schools, and she was trying to decide between them, weighing factors like program quality, location, financial aid, and the overall campus culture. She had opinions about all of it, was wrestling with the decision in a way that suggested genuine agency and engagement with her own future. Marcus and Sarah offered their thoughts, but they were clear that the final decision was Emma's to make. Sarah talked about her own work. She'd been promoted to a management position at the non-profit where she worked, overseeing a team of younger professionals. She'd initially been nervous about the leadership role, but she discovered she had a talent for it, a capacity to mentor others while maintaining clear boundaries and expectations. "I'm actually really happy," she said, and there was something in her expression that suggested this was still slightly surprising to her, that happiness, after years of struggle, felt almost like a luxury she had to consciously allow herself to experience. Marcus talked about his own work, about a particular project his firm was undertaking, designing sustainable water infrastructure for a rural community that had been struggling with contaminated water supplies. "The work is challenging," he said, "but it's meaningful in a way my previous work never was. I'm not just solving engineering problems, I'm actually improving people's lives." Toward the end of dinner, Sarah raised her glass. "To second chances," she said simply, but with weight and intention. "To the courage it takes to change. To the people we love who give us space and grace to become different than we were. To redemption being not just a spiritual concept, but an actual daily practice." Emma raised her glass. "To Grandpa James," she added, using the term loosely, but with genuine affection for a man she'd never met, but felt she knew through the stories her father had shared. To him leaving that note. To him believing that someone someday might need his words. Marcus raised his glass last. "To staying," he said, "to choosing life, to choosing connection. To every person in this world who's standing at the edge of an abyss and needs to know that stepping back is an act of courage, not cowardice. To every person struggling with isolation, addiction, depression, failure, to knowing that it's not too late, that the person you've been is not the person you must remain, that love, actual love, from people who care about you, is the strongest force we have against the darkness." They drank together, and the clink of their glasses seemed to echo slightly in the quiet restaurant, a sound of connection, of family, of transformation made tangible. In the months that followed, Marcus continued his work of rebuilding and maintaining. He attended Emma's graduation ceremony, sitting with Sarah cheering as his daughter walked across the stage to receive her diploma. He helped Emma move into her college dorm at the school she'd chosen. He maintained regular contact with Margaret's family, visiting occasionally, attending a few family gatherings, becoming in some way an honorary member of James's extended family, a testament to how profoundly James's legacy of redemption continued to ripple outward. He maintained his therapeutic work, continuing to process the trauma of his own journey and the patterns that had led him toward isolation and self-destruction. He attended Emma's environmental science presentations, where she shared her passion for climate research. He and Sarah continued their weekly coffee meetings, their conversations evolving from logistics and co-parenting into genuine friendship and mutual support. Most significantly, Marcus arranged with the local property owner to formally preserve the cabin. A trust was established to maintain it, to ensure that it would remain accessible to travelers who might find themselves in need of shelter. The original box containing James's letters and photographs was moved to a climate-controlled archive at the State Historical Society, where it could be preserved for future generations to study. But a reproduction of James's final note, his message to whoever might find the cabin, was placed back in the cabin, framed and protected, a continuing beacon of hope for anyone who might arrive there in crisis. The story of James and the way it had transformed Marcus's life began to spread through Margaret's family and eventually through the wider community. A local historian became interested in the narrative and published a small article in the regional magazine about James's journey and his impact across generations. The article mentioned Marcus by name with his permission, and suddenly Marcus began receiving messages from other people, strangers who'd read the story and found something in it that spoke to their own struggles. Some wrote of contemplating suicide and finding the story about James and Marcus a reason to reconsider. Others wrote about the relationships they were rebuilding, the second chances they were giving and receiving. Still others simply wrote to express gratitude for the reminder that transformation is possible, that the worst version of ourselves is not our only option. Marcus didn't respond to every message, but he tried to acknowledge each one. He began occasionally speaking at community centers and mental health organizations about his experience, about the journey from isolation to connection, about what it meant to choose redemption not as a single moment, but as a daily practice. He was careful never to present his story as a simple solution to complex problems, never to suggest that finding a motivational note would automatically resolve depression or suicidality. But he was willing to testify to the fact that connection matters, that stories matter, that witnessing someone else's journey toward transformation can sometimes be enough to make us reconsider our own path. 2 years after his descent from the mountain, Marcus was contacted by a documentary filmmaker interested in telling the story of James, of Marcus, and of the way that redemption can reach across time to transform unexpected people. Marcus initially resisted. He didn't want his private healing journey turned into entertainment. But after discussing it with Emma and Sarah, he agreed to participate, with the understanding that the documentary would be framed not as inspiration porn or simple feel-good content, but as a serious exploration of redemption, of the work that transformation requires, of the complex reality of healing and change. The documentary, which premiered at a regional film festival, was titled The Note, and it told the story of James's journey, his crisis in the cabin, his decision to rebuild, and his commitment to leaving hope for strangers. It then transitioned to Marcus's story. His own isolation, his descent into crisis, his discovery of James's legacy, and his journey back toward connection. The film was honest about Marcus's ongoing struggles, about the therapy he continued to attend, about the fact that recovery wasn't linear or complete, but rather a continuing process of choosing connection over isolation, presence over avoidance, growth over stagnation. The documentary also featured interviews with Margaret's family, with Emma, with Sarah, with Marcus's therapist, and his colleagues at work. It became a meditation on what redemption actually looks like, not as a dramatic transformation, but as the daily choice to show up, to be honest, to reach toward the people who matter, even when it's difficult. By the time Emma graduated from college, 4 years after Marcus's winter in the cabin, the documentary had been shown at multiple film festivals and had gained a modest but passionate following. Emma, now working for the State Environmental Agency in the very region where the cabin stood, had watched her father's transformation unfold across the span of her young adulthood. She'd witnessed what genuine change looked like, what commitment to growth and connection actually meant when practiced consistently over years rather than promised in moments of crisis. On Emma's graduation day, Marcus stood with Sarah watching their daughter receive her diploma in environmental science. Emma had spent her college years developing her skills in climate monitoring and environmental research. Her thesis had been published in a peer-reviewed journal, a remarkable achievement for an undergraduate. She had secured a position that would allow her to continue her research in the mountains, in the very region where her father's transformation had begun. After the ceremony, the three of them stood together for photographs. Emma held her diploma, her face radiant with accomplishment. Sarah had her arm around both Marcus and Emma. Marcus stood between them, tears flowing freely, overcome with gratitude for the fact that he was here to witness this moment, that he'd chosen to stay, that his choice to step back from the edge had led to this. His daughter becoming a capable, thoughtful adult, contributing to the world, pursuing meaningful work. "Thank you," Emma said, looking at both her parents, "for staying, for trying, for believing that I was worth staying for." Sarah squeezed her hand. "You were always worth it," she said. "Always." Marcus nodded, unable to speak through the tears and gratitude. He thought of James standing in a cabin 60 years ago, deciding to live. He thought of the note that had reached across decades to find him, at his moment of greatest darkness. He thought of the infinite ripples of that single choice to rebuild, to reconnect, to reach toward the future with hope, rather than toward oblivion with despair. The story didn't end here. Stories of real human transformation never truly end, because change is ongoing, because healing requires constant practice, because connection must be chosen and recommitted to in each moment. But here, surrounded by the two people he loved most in the world, with his daughter stepping forward into her own purpose-driven life, Marcus allowed himself to feel the profound grace of being alive, of having chosen to stay, of having been given the gift of witnessing the good that his choice had created. The cabin still stood on the mountain, preserved and waiting. The note still hung in its frame, ready for whoever might arrive there next in crisis or darkness, needing to know that change is possible, that redemption is real, that it's never too late to choose life, to choose connection, to choose love over despair. And in communities and living rooms and therapeutic offices across the region and beyond, people continued to speak about James and Marcus, continued to find in their stories a reason to reconsider their own paths, continued to understand that the person they'd been was not the person they must remain forever. Redemption, real redemption, looked like this: a man choosing to live, a man choosing to rebuild, a man choosing every single day to show up for the people he loved. A man who had been given a second chance and who spent the rest of his life trying to be worthy of that grace. Thank you so much for watching this complete story with me. If this narrative of transformation and redemption touched your heart, I would genuinely love to hear about it in the comments below. What moment resonated most with you? Did any part of Marcus or James's journey speak to something in your own life? Please take a moment to leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and genuinely value hearing how these stories land with you. Your feedback helps me understand what narratives matter most to our community. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I'd love to have you as part of our community. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. These narratives about human resilience, redemption, and transformation deserve to be shared widely. And your support helps me continue creating content that reminds us of our shared humanity and our profound capacity for change. Thank you again for spending this time with Marcus and James's story. Keep being kind to yourselves and each other. And remember, if you're standing at the edge of your own darkness, please reach out. Talk to someone. Call a crisis helpline. Email a friend. Because like James, like Marcus, you're worth saving, your life matters, you matter. See you in the next video.